Hi there everyone, my name is Forrest and today we're going to be going over the fifth and last module of the series of System Hardening for Beginners. Now, before we dive into the module of Network Security, I do just want to quickly recap over what we've already talked on. Now, in the beginning of this course, or this series really, we went ahead and defined really what system hardening means and what that can entail, as well as scoped exactly what we're going to be doing for the purposes of this course. We then went ahead and did a little bit of user access based activities based on the host system. We went ahead and figured out a little bit of PowerShell, graphical user interface, how to enable, disable, remove, and add users. Beyond that, we then went into out-of-the-box security concepts. That includes things like Windows operating systems like Windows Security and Mac operating systems such as File Vault or any of the built-in Mac security. Lastly, we also have touched on disk encryption. Now, this is a bit more of a, I'd say, higher level feature, but overall, we just talked about how we can go ahead and leverage it and some best practices around it, right? Now, today, we're going to be talking about network security, and we're ultimately going to recap and give a summary over the whole series. That's why I'm in the Hawaiian shirt, so I can go ahead and say aloha, which means hello and goodbye, and send you all off to have a great, great future with your system hardening. So, as we do that, let's go ahead and dive directly into the PowerPoint here. So again, we're going to be covering network security. This is going to be the last module in the series that is planned for, at least. So immediately, why do we think of network security, right? And the main idea is whenever someone is online on the network, they face risk by the very nature of just being online. If their computer accepts all of the various connections that it could, that poses a significant risk to a user that's frankly unnecessary. Now, that can be for an enterprise-based system, or that can be for a personal system, right? If you're taking on unnecessary risk, well, you're probably going to end up getting compromised and getting an infection, be it from malware, be it ransomware, or what have you. Now, this is coupled with the idea that regardless of the capabilities and the security of your equipment, if you are public, a bad actor typically can exploit something, right? They can go ahead and say, well, I can at least ping this person, I know that they exist. That's an attack surface, let me now scan that. So, by the very nature of being online, you have risk. Now, ideally, we have this idea, right? This principle of least privilege. And essentially, that means that we should use the least that we really need to do. And that translates very well in terms of what we want to do for network security, right? For instance, if all you're ever going to be doing on your computer is surfing the web, you're never going to be responding to emails, you're never going to be doing any gaming or anything else, you're just literally surfing through Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, or Mozilla Firefox, right? Well, you ideally don't need to have all of these various ports opened. You only really should have ports 443 and port 80 opened at that point. Depending on your use case, you might also need a few other ones, but generally speaking, that's as you discover it, you go ahead and define exactly what you need. So one good example, if you never need to have a remote desktop session, something that's often used to be able to connect from one machine to the other machine, in name, remote desktop session, right? And in theory, because you can then go ahead and conduct activities over RDP. So if you're never using that, well, you probably shouldn't have that open on your machine then. Same idea goes along with various softwares, various applications, and just overall concepts, right? You don't need to have all of this stuff installed just because. If you're not ever using it, remove it. Now, additionally, in terms of the idea of network security, you want to have your network settings set up properly. You want to make sure, as we talked about in that out of the box, that whatever is set up on your Windows firewall is what you need it to be, right? You don't need to just go ahead and say, allow anything. We're going to dive into that a little bit more in this upcoming module, in this upcoming slides here. Now, one key thing, if you're going into cybersecurity, if you are going into information security, whichever flavor you want to call it, you want to at least be intermediary of networking. Now, that isn't to say you need to be a network expert. You don't need to know every single piece of network equipment. You don't need to be the pro at Cisco ASA or F5 load balancing or Palo Alto NGFWs, right? You just need to be intermediary about networking. Why? Well, if you're going into security, you have to understand how your users are communicating from the external network into the internal network and vice versa. Not only that, but that helps you figure out what is legitimate and what isn't. A huge part of security is being able to pick up on when something is going wrong, right? When the bad happens, essentially. If you don't know the basic networking or even intermediary networking, it's going to be an immense challenge for you. So if you're going into information security / cybersecurity, please, please, please definitely take the time, learn about networking at a very minimum. Do the CompTIA Network Plus, be that sitting for the exam or doing training modules on it. Ideally, you want to go a step further. You want to do a little bit of CCNP or CCNA, so on and so forth. All right, let's go ahead and move on from here. So one of the key areas, and for the purposes of this scope, to make sure that we're just being as easy as possible for our demos and labs without having to overcomplicate it, right? We're going to talk about host firewall. And a host firewall typically is known through a consumer and an enterprise environment alike. It's something that's on a Windows system and a Mac OS system. If you remember from that out of the box on Windows, you actually saw where we can go ahead and allow things through the firewall. Well, that's not a network-based device, that's on your host. So that is your host firewall right there. And this is something that blocks unwanted contact whenever you're connected online. So the most important thing about this all is with a host firewall, it goes by the top and it works its way down. So essentially it's a descending based list. So it'll check essentially, let's say you have 5 different rows, right? 5 different rules set up. It'll check to say, does this match rule 1? Okay, no issues with rule 1. Does this match rule 2? No issues with rule 2. Does this match rule 3? Yes, it does. Well, guess what? Rules 4 and 5, they don't run because it already matched rule 3. So again, you just want to be aware of these networking concepts, not because of anything bad, but because this is how you can go ahead and determine what should or should not be going on your network. A good way to see this is actually through a visual, in my opinion. This is just a screen grab that I ended up capturing, but essentially it's the Windows firewall. It's the host firewall rules. They go top to bottom. This is just out of the box. This isn't anything elaborate. It's just something that was set up. And again, it looks for anything that matches the rules defined at the top and then goes ahead and goes over the lower rules. Now you may be thinking, why wouldn't we want it to look for all of that though, right? Well, the simple issue is network traffic and internet traffic just overall, it moves in milliseconds, right? It's not something that we can take minutes to decide. It's not even something we can take seconds to decide. It's something that we have to have done in milliseconds, really. The more and more network or firewall-based rules that you have, the more conditions it has to check and the longer that time goes, right? So essentially, what it looks for, you define the rules that you say, absolutely no way, or hey, absolutely this should come in. And then it goes ahead and looks for the first one it matches. Now, don't get me wrong, if you have 50,000 rules, guess what? It could still run through all 50,000 of those rules, and it still couldn't find a match. But the key emphasis is you're trying to define all of these possible use cases that you as a personal user or you as an administrator on your enterprise's network would go ahead and define. And you want to make sure that whenever you're doing this, you're not blocking legitimate traffic, because nothing is worse than whenever you have security getting in the way of availability, right? You want to find that healthy balance between the two. And you want to make sure that you're not impairing your users based on the, not even real security, just based on the idea of security. So let's go ahead and move on here. As well, we do have an example of the Mac OS host firewall. This is just, again, another screen grab I went ahead and found here, but it's essentially the same concept, right? It's looking for various ports here, so we can see SSH, we can see screen sharing, we can see a few different apps and bundles that are defined, and so on and so forth. It's the same concept, essentially, as the Windows firewall there. And this, again, it's something that we're not going to be able to cover because we don't have a Mac OS based virtual machine, but it's just something to be aware of that it does exist. All right, let's go ahead and move on from here. So we do have the Windows host firewall. So on the Windows host firewall, settings can be configured really based on the host rules and the network type. So you can see in here, block all incoming connections, including those in the list of allowed apps, and you can set that for the domain, you can set that for the private network, you can set that for the public network, right? And in this as well, that's where you can go ahead and use any of those predefined. You can see that on the right here, and that is just any of those predefined rules like remote assistance or anything else like that. All that to say, let's go ahead and dive on in to what this looks like. So we're going to go ahead and do a demo. So we'll get our VirtualBox up and running here. So let's go ahead and pivot over to our VirtualBox then. So again, we have this login. Let me cancel out of that to have the full screen and logging on in now. Oh. There we go. All right, so we're going to go ahead and let this log on in, and then we're going to go ahead and navigate to the firewall and network protection settings. We're going to briefly cover those as we go through it. All right, so again, we'll launch this up through the start menu, and we'll do firewall and network protection. Easy enough. And you're going to see this is going to seem pretty familiar if you watched the out-of-the-box security measures and everything like that. But we're now going to get a little bit more in depth about it. So we didn't go into this earlier, but we're going to go to advanced settings. And we're going to let this go. And we're going to click on the new tab that went ahead and launched. So now we have a few different profiles, for instance. So you can see immediately your domain profile, your private profile, and your public profile, right? And it tells you a little brief overview of each of them. You know, hey, on each of them, Windows Defender's firewall is on or off. It tells you about the inbound connections that do not match a rule that are blocked, outbound connections that do not match a rule that are allowed. So let's go ahead and click onto, let's just say, inbound. So this is all the rules based on just out-of-the-box configurations. I haven't done any of these, but let's talk through them very briefly. And we're not going to go through this whole list, I promise. I'm not that crazy to say. But let's do a new rule. And let's talk about these different program types that can be defined, or I'm sorry, these different parameters that can be defined. So first and foremost, we have the program, and that can block a connection or allow a connection based on a specific executable. Whenever we're saying that, think of programs, right? Zoom.exe, Skype.exe, Warcraft3.exe, whatever it may be, right? This is where you can go ahead and define a program, a specific executable that's running. For the port, that's something that controls and, again, allows or denies a specific port that is blocked or allowed. So that can be something like DNS, that can be something like HTTP, so on and so forth. Again, you might not be aware of what TCP or UDP means. At a very high level, TCP is connection-based. It wants the communication back, right? It's, hey, we're having a conversation, come on, talk back at me, right? Whereas UDP, it's someone that just won't shut up. They're going to send the information regardless, and you're going to receive it or you're going to decline it, but they're going to keep on talking. Predefined, though, that's something out of the box. So we saw that in the screenshot, and we can define this even further. We can say, hey, this is a remote shutdown, an SMMP trap, anything else like that, right? And then we finally get to something of custom. So this is where you can define multiple different parameters. You can see on the left here, you can say program, protocol and scope, ports, scope, action, profile name, and name. So you can get very granular with these sort of controls. The main thing I would emphasize, you as a standard user probably don't need to go ahead and be this granular, right? If you want to mess around and maybe learn a bit more about your network, maybe learn a bit more about security, more than welcome to. I always encourage doing that on a, maybe machine that you don't have to worry about if something gets blocked. So if it's on your parents' machine or if it's on, your partner's machine, probably not a good idea. But overall, it's something that you can mess with. I wouldn't actually encourage messing with this on a virtual box. And the main reason is, well, you don't really have the traffic to see what is or isn't happening. That said, always test before you go ahead and implement anything. Make sure you know what you're doing. All right, so we're going to go ahead and cancel out of this. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the network settings from here. So we're going to do network settings. And technically this will say Ethernet settings. It might say Wi-Fi settings for you, so on and so forth. But let's do Ethernet settings. And in my case, we're going to click on network. And this is where we can define, actually. We can finally now define it. Woo! This is where we can define if it's a public or a private. We can't really define a domain join because that's actually based on something completely different. But this goes ahead and lets you define the profile, right? You'll often, whenever you first connect to a network, you'll get a pop-up that says, hey, is this a public network? Is it a private network? What's going on with it, right? This is how you can change it. And you can see right here, right? Configure firewall and security settings. So what I'm going to do actually on this one, I'm going to just flag this over as, no, we'll keep it as private, right? So what we'll do then, we're on a private network and we're on a, we're back at the Windows Defender firewall. And what we're going to go ahead and do is set up a new rule, and it's going to block HTTPS connections. And what we'll do is, we'll set up this one, and we'll say, actually we want to set it on the outbound, I apologize. And we want to block it to custom, we'll say all programs, no big deal. We'll say protocol. Well, I specifically want to say TCP. We'll do port, specific ports. We'll do a bit of both. Should be 443, but we'll just double check. Oh, is my keyboard not working? Hang tight. All right, my keyboard is now working, so we got port 443, and we're just going to define that on both sides, just for ease. And we're going to say which rule, which local IP address, okay, no big deal, no big deal. And we're then going to say block the connection, and we're only going to apply this whenever it's on public, right? So we'll do demo 1. And in this, so essentially what I did is I made it to where I can't go ahead and navigate to anything over HTTPS. So if I go ahead and do google.com, no, it went ahead and worked, okay. Let's see here. Alright, so it went ahead and worked for Google and it's doing the search, but let's just try to go ahead and go to Twitch, just as an ease, right? And so we can see, okay, well, your internet access is blocked. So remember, we went ahead and did this on a private network. Let's go ahead and flip this over now. We'll pick up on the settings, and let's flip this over to a public one, right? And let's try that. And boom, we can see that we can now navigate to Twitch. And you know why? Because whenever we define this out, this demo 1 rule, where is it applied to, folks? If we go ahead and look at the advanced tab, it's applied to both the domain and private. It's not applied to public. So let's go ahead and apply this to public. And remember, we're on this public network type, quote unquote. Let's just refresh. Now we can't go ahead and access it. Again, for the sake of the demo, we're going to go ahead and change this back over to private. We're going to, just for the sake of it, disable the rule. I want to show you before we go ahead and delete it that now that it's disabled, I can now, again, successfully navigate to Twitch. I'm going to fully delete it, but just wanted to give that emphasis that you can disable rules as well. I've deleted it now successfully on Twitch. Okay, can get there, no issue. If I go back to public now, rule is deleted entirely, right? So on public, it's still fine. So overall, we saw how the Windows firewall settings end up working. Let's go ahead and go back to the slideshow here. So we have now finally finished out the main material, the last demo of the series, the last Forest. Why are you showing us this, right? On that, you still have one lab to do. Again, please, please, please do not conduct these labs on your personal computer. Use VirtualBox for these. An OVA file to be able to be imported into VirtualBox is provided. And as well, this is an independent activity. You can work, along with each other, but it's not going to be something that, we can do live or guided through or anything like that. So, in this, you have a scenario now, and it is that you have been asked to block a specific TCP protocol. In this one, I just randomly gave one, 53181, from your network. To test this ahead of time, you will block ports 443 and 80 to ensure that the Windows firewall is working. However, you still need to allow other connections such as DNS to still proceed, but you need to block TCP 443 and 80 and meet the error page. That is your criteria of success, right? All right. So, we are now at the recap session. Now remember, throughout this series, we've really talked about the basics of system hardening. In this, we've discussed the ideas about user accounts, including how to harden them. We've talked about credentials. We've talked about role-based control, what they might need for enabling and disabling. We've talked about the ideas of using built-in security, things such as, well, typically it's sufficient for most people, right? And that there are options that can also be leveraged depending on our risk tolerance and what we really want to do. We've talked about encryption. So we talked about the differences of FireVault, which is the Mac OS out of the box, and BitLocker, which is the Windows out of the box for specific types of Windows licenses, and why we need to go ahead and apply encryption in the first place. And finally, we've now talked about network security out of the box, right? This isn't actually, I'd say, a network security course, right? This is a very basic level, getting familiar with how ports and network connectivity works. This is not anything such as using routers, using switches, or firewalls. This is something on your host, right? So just being careful on that one, but we've talked to the ideas of networks, how on Windows devices they're defined, and how to secure them. We've also talked about the ideas of firewall rules at this point in time. So folks, this is really the main thing. Keep on asking these questions in the Alphagrad Discord. Ask the administrator team, ask myself. I'm pretty active there. Just shoot me a message sometimes if you ever want to chat, and we can always nerd out about any of this, right? Last note, upcoming session, there's no more planned on this. Depending on the receiving of this series, I might work with the Alphagrad team again to go ahead and provide a series for them. But the main thing I want to emphasize, keep on learning, guys. Learn as much as you possibly can. Technology is always emerging and it's always growing. You're going to have endless amounts of things to learn, right? So learn as much as you can, but take the time for yourself as well. Don't just 24 hours a day study, study, study. Take the time for your own mental health as well. But on that all, thank you all. It's been a great time having this series. I really had fun putting it together, and I'm really glad that it's going to good use for the Alphagrad community. The Alphagrad community means a lot to me from previously volunteering as an admin there, but I'm really honored and I'm really thankful for the current administrative team to go ahead and partner with me on this. Allow me to go ahead and set this series up and provide this value. I hope this has been a valuable series for you. I really enjoyed making it, and thank you all so much for the time. Have a great one. Bye-bye.